Our next speaker will be Osprey Orielle Lake, who is the founder and executive director of Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. Osprey is co-director of the Indigenous Women's Divestment Delegations, works nationally and internationally with grassroots and frontline women leaders and policymakers. Her role involves building women's leadership, climate justice, resilient communities and leading on a just transition to a democratic and decentralised energy future. Osprey, I would like to invite you to address the Chamber.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's truly an honor to participate in this event with so many esteemed leaders. Thank you very much for inviting me. The question for this session that I was invited to speak about is how to address climate justice and include communities most impacted by the climate crisis. Well, it's quite straightforward what I have to say. We are not willing to die. We are not willing to die because corporations and governments tell us that they are doing everything that they can to address the climate crisis, yet emissions continue to rise, as we've been talking about. We're not willing to die because of the insistence upon endless economic growth and extractive industries that particularly harm women and Indigenous, Black, Brown, island nations and Global South peoples, as we have heard earlier today. We are not being unreasonable with our demands for climate justice, as if we do not understand what is possible in the political sphere or the business goals of financial institutions. Rather, we understand the laws of physics and that we will not allow for sacrificed people and sacrifice zones or corporate colonialism or incremental transitions to renewable energy or false solutions like carbon offset schemes, instead of stopping pollution at the source. We actually don't want net zero. We want real zero, and we want it now. We're not willing to die because those with political power and wealth are having a difficult time understanding that everything is already changing. Mother Nature has made that perfectly clear. I live in California, where year after year now we are facing catastrophic fires. My lungs and those of many are damaged, or we have lost loved ones to climate-fueled flames. Lives gone forever. I stand before you offering a call to action that was recently delivered to governments and financial institutions by the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice. It is a call to action from women and feminists around the world, representing millions of people, outlining in explicit detail what can be done to meet the 1.5 degrees target with already existing climate justice frameworks. And I present this to everyone in the chamber, and it will be online. We included both governments and financial institutions in our recommendations because we are well aware of the power of the fossil fuel industry in these two sectors. 60 of the largest banks in the world have collectively financed $3.8 trillion in fossil fuel companies since the Paris Agreement. And the recent report by the UN Environment Programme found that governments still plan to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than what would be consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Yes, some new commitments have been made here at the COP, but more is needed, and we applaud those, but more are needed. How can we successfully navigate COP26 with these impossible numbers? Climate justice means no more rhetoric without copious amounts of action. So the question is, where are the government leaders willing to stand up to the fossil fuel industry? And where is the $100 billion a year promised from wealthy countries so we can move toward a just transition? We can move billions once we claim a global climate emergency, trillions, and pulling for military budgets is a good place to begin. I find my deepest moral compass and courage in civil society, especially with women leaders around the world. We are in the streets, in the fields, in the boardrooms, and in the halls of power. We are putting our bodies on the line. Some of us are getting arrested, criminalized, experiencing torture, and even murdered for standing up for the last of the clean water, the last of the forests, for what we hold as sacred, for the last chance for our climate and a livable future. What is happening now is not only unjust, but it's actually insane. And collectively, we all have to stop it. We are not willing to die or sacrifice future generations for truly pitiful reasons of greed, political power, and hubris. Rather, we are willing to fight, to use our imaginations, innovations, to be alive, to thrive, to be courageous, to be uncomfortable for positive changes, to be bold, and to win. We are willing to endlessly fight for policies that prioritize social, racial, and economic justice and Indigenous and human rights. The real problem is not that we don't have a plethora of solutions, from agroecology to Indigenous rights, from regenerative energy to feminist economics and the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Rather, the problem is the insistent structural interference that those in power are exercising in response to people taking real action. In the face of this, we are rising all over the world and growing stronger. We can act now, and we must act now. So I respectfully ask you to join me in totally breaking business as usual at COP26 to create the healthy and just world we know is possible. Thank you for hearing these words. Please let them pierce our hearts with courage so we can fight together for our collective survival. And with that, I want to show you a very short video to bring into the room voices of some incredible Indigenous women leaders that I work with. I want to recognize that Indigenous peoples and their rights are in fact a way to keep 1.5 alive and a way to respect the principles of climate justice. So let's hear their fiery voices now. Thank you.
The decisions you make as Credit Suisse and the Swiss people affect those of us downstream from your actions. You sit here comfortably in your privilege, while our communities bear the risks of your investments with our very health, our lives. We face a future without clean water as you reap your dividends and returns. What do you as Swiss people hold sacred? To us, water is life, to all of us. I request that you directly answer my questions now.
Thank you. I will answer your question, as I said, at the end when everybody has spoken. And the next speaker is Monica Verdin.
I'm a shareholder, and I request that you answer our questions individually.
Thank you very much. I'm the chairman who runs this AGM, and I decided I will answer at the end, which is my right, and I have to live with it. Thank you.
Here to let the investors know in the Kinder Morgan Pipeline Expansion Project how directly affected we are and how many times that we have opposed this project. We've been marginally ignored within that process, and the consultation that we had required has not been.
Can you guarantee me and my nation that you will no longer have business relationships and provide finance for Kinder Morgan Company?
We are here today to let Credit Suisse and all the other banks that are financing these projects that we have not given our consent, that we find water and clean air and land to be critical infrastructure, not pipelines. We're all citizens of this planet, and what happens in our homelands will affect the people here in Switzerland.
For over a year and a half, we have tried to pursue all legal avenues possible, petitioning our state and federal agencies to conduct environmental impact studies, yet we have been unheard and our resistance to this corporate colonialism that is tied to carbon extraction is growing, especially during these times where corporations are influencing our government to pass laws restricting our rights. What changes has Credit Suisse made to its due diligence and risk assessment processes following Dakota Access Pipeline?
Investing in a company is just that, whether it's project level or corporate level financing. We need you to stop financing these dangerous companies. Two of the banks our delegation also met with, UBS and DNB, who we provided the same exact information to, chose not to renew their credit facilities with ETP. Yet Credit Suisse has taken no action and has made no statement.
Not once in these calculations of profits is the loss of Indigenous peoples' culture on this planet mentioned as a risk. Credit Suisse has a choice to do the right thing. So until then, Indigenous peoples will continue to wage and escalate a mass globalization, calling for accountability of Credit Suisse in the financial industry. We will call for divestment, we will call for a boycott, we will call for the sanction of Credit Suisse for these Indigenous human rights violations by these oil companies that you are supporting by any and all means necessary.
I ask that the Swiss people stand with us. I ask that you hold Credit Suisse accountable and say no. No, we will not fund these projects that are hurting people and committing human and Indigenous rights abuses.
Thank you very much. My name is Liam MacArthur, MSP. I'm one of the Deputy Presiding Officers in the Parliament. I'll be chairing the session immediately after lunch. I would like to thank Ms Lake for the presentation. I'm conscious of time. I would like to squeeze in at least one question if I could, but it would need to be very brief before we break for lunch. At the back of the room there.
Hello, this is Senator Rosa Galvez from the Parliament of Canada. In many oil-producing countries, it's true that the lobbying from the oil and gas is very strong. They are very powerful and they have many resources. What is the best way to counterbalance these lobbying efforts? Through legislations, through advocacy, through civil disobedience?
I think all of the above. I think you outlined it quite well. I think that we need to do more advocacy. We need to do more street action. We need to also really end fossil fuel subsidies. I think there's a lot of things that can be done at the government level that are not being implemented right now. So again, one of the things I was saying in my comments is that while we see a lot of discussion in the Paris Agreement about emissions, we don't see the discussion of what is happening on the supply end, which is fossil fuels, because of the strength of the fossil fuel industry. And this is why we're really calling for government leaders to stand up to the fossil fuel industry. They cannot be getting their campaign financing, as an example, from the fossil fuel industry. And we have to talk about the elephant in the room, because no matter what we do to reduce carbon emissions, if we keep expanding and extracting fossil fuels, we can't actually get to 1.5 degrees and honor and be in alignment with the Paris Agreement. So that's why you're seeing, and I wanted to show the voices of what's really happening on the front lines of a lot of these projects, and especially with Indigenous peoples, where a lot of our last resources are. 80% of the biodiversity left on Earth is in the lands and hands of Indigenous peoples, and a lot of the oil is under the grounds of these forests. And that's why we're seeing the role of Indigenous rights and the need to protect Indigenous peoples and frontline defenders. We must really stand for them because, in fact, this is where the oil is and the coal is and the gas is. And so that's why we think there needs to be an integrated strategy of working inside government, but also recognizing that a lot of these frontline communities are literally putting their bodies on the line, getting arrested, some of them murdered, as I mentioned, because they're trying to protect the water for all of us. They're trying to protect the forest for all of us. And I think there's just not enough inclusion. I was asked here to talk about inclusion of climate justice and inclusion of voices. We need those voices of the people on the front lines who are protecting the land and the water and really doing everything they can to stop this fossil fuel expansion, because the industry of fossil fuels is so powerful, and we need to stop business as usual with the fossil fuel industry. And I know tomorrow my colleague Zipporah Berman is going to be talking about the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. We need governments to get behind shutting down this industry. I don't know how to put it more blatantly. We can't get to stopping the climate crisis without stopping fossil fuel expansion and extraction. And we are having a very difficult time finding government leaders who are willing to be strong enough to say no to that industry. It's time to say no and to shut them down. We have, as many speakers have said, the ability to move to renewable energy, the financing to do it. We need for financial institutions, banks, asset managers, insurers, and the government through regulation to say no more to the fossil fuel industry. We're not going to get where we need to go without that action.
Thank you very much indeed. That, I think, has whetted our appetite for the challenge session, climate justice and challenge of inclusion, which will continue after lunch. I'm conscious of time, so I'm afraid we won't be able to take any more questions now. But could I ask you, please, to join me in thanking Osprey Orielle Lake for setting the scene so well.